Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today on this August 5th, 2021. I am Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and today we are speaking again 1 year later with Jack Kelly. Before we get that underway, I just want to thank our patron sponsors, ABS Quality Evaluations, an ABS Group company, and Onuma System. You can find more out about those organizations at abs-qe.com, abs-group.com, and onuma-bim.com. Really cool organizations, and we are super grateful for their continuing support. Other organizational members you can see here on your screen. And again, we couldn't do programs like this without their support. So big thank you to all these organizations you see here. Last but not least, I want to say that next week on August 12th, Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern again, we will be talking to retired Colonel Ronald Bordenaro. And so stay tuned for that and come join us then to see Ronald and Mike Bordenaro talk. I think that's all the updates. And if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So send any comments, questions, or feedback in the chat, and we'll make sure to ask Jack Kelly those questions. And now Jim Dieter, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Nick.
Sure.
So it's, God, I love doing these shows. And what a pleasure it's been to do these over the past year. Mike Bordenaro and I did sort of a test of this, and sort of talked to each other one time. But then the first scheduled show that we broadcast was with Jack Kelly. And that was quite the experience. But so Jack, welcome. It's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
So before we came on, you were mentioning a takeaway that you had from your previous experience on the show. Would you mind sharing that?
Nice of you to remember. Back what I remembered was, because I went back and rewatched it, and it reminded me that I don't remember what I was asked to speak about, but whatever it was, I had made copious notes because there were things that I wanted to make sure I talked about. And it was horrible. I mean, because I kept, you could see me keep looking down on my papers to try to make sure I didn't forget anything. And it was a whole lot less. It was memorable in a way that I wish it hadn't been. Because it was kind of stilted. It took me a while before I either ran out of notes or just quit even trying to look, and then it got more natural and it seemed to flow a lot better. So if there's any advice I can give future people being interviewed for Thursday at 4 is don't sweat it. I mean, whether it's Mike doing the interviews, whether it's Jim doing the interviews, they do a great job, and you just go with the flow. Just be yourself. I was understandably nervous about just being myself, but it just seemed to work out okay.
That's great, Jack. Thanks. Yeah, we were looking for that soundbite to share with future guests on ALN Thursday at 4. So that's perfect. So usually we start with an origin story, but I think we did that the last time. So let me break it into 2 bites. So what's some ancient history about Jack Kelly? How'd you get in? Yeah, I know you have a long history of public service. Can you give us, a relatively brief version of your history of public service?
You asked too much. I was doing a little bit of thinking about that today, and what I really, in some respects, so many points in my history seem to be helping me prepare for the moment that I'm in now. I mean, back when I was at college, I got a degree in industrial engineering. Industrial engineering is all about improving work processes of organizations. And one of the topics that I studied was systems engineering. It was relatively new in those days. And in fact, I went to Georgia Tech. And so the School of Industrial Engineering is now known as the School of Industrial and Systems Engineering. So that just gives you an idea of how important systems engineering is understood in today's academic environment, particularly when you're talking about work processes. And so then after spending 3 years working for working for basically what was Accenture before when Accenture was still a part of Arthur Andersen as an IT guy. I mean, I designed computer systems. I was an assembly language programmer, which is great to kind of understand, punch card technology back in those days in terms of IT. Those are the early days of IT. I went to work for the state of Georgia as a management analyst. And my first assignment was to work on the reorganization of the Georgia government. And under then Governor Carter, it wasn't just reorganization, it was called the Reorganization and Management Improvement Project. So I was also the lead team leader on 2 of the management improvement projects. One was in purchasing, the other was in personnel. And so, and we had, industry executives from Atlanta advising those 2 functional teams. And so I got to meet some really smart people who were, industry experts in purchasing and in personnel. And I was responsible, my team was responsible for addressing all of the administrative service functions in the Georgia government. And our team's recommendations led to the creation of the Georgia version of GSA. It's called the Department of Administrative Services. But it was all about the administrative support functions of the Georgia government. And then in the years that I was there, before I was invited to come up to Washington, basically I worked on different, management improvement projects. And in that process, I learned a lot about the importance of stakeholder input to change management. There was a lot of stuff that I learned that kind of helped build a foundation of tools that were helpful to me in the federal government. In the federal government, I was invited up to help design the reorganization of the whole federal government, which I thought was kind of a step up, but it turned out that the people who were actually in charge of it were not as competent in fulfilling their responsibilities as my colleagues in Georgia were. So although we actually accomplished more than most people remember, it was certainly a disappointment in terms of what we had hoped to accomplish. But nonetheless, in that process, I learned a whole lot. And the one other anecdote I'll share, because I think it's relevant, is that after that was over, what I had concluded was that OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, where I worked, they like to issue management policies, but they never did anything to implement those policies. And by the way, in a 2016 study by the Partnership for Public Service, they made the same statement. They had done an analysis of OMB policy and realized that OMB issues a policy and walks away. Well, I thought that was terrible, because that's not what I had done when I was in Georgia. And so I decided to show them how it could be done. So I basically was given an opportunity to create a project the initial scope of the project was to see if we couldn't use government's buying power to get discount airfares for federal travelers. Sounded like a good idea. What I realized was that you can't just, that wasn't a sufficient way to look at the problem. So I did my usual, consultant research and realized that if you were going to do that, you had to do a whole lot of things, including come up with a way to control the way that people made airline reservations. And so that got involved in understanding travel regulations, who issues them, who has a responsibility for all that stuff, understanding the airline industry a whole lot more. Fast forward, by the end of the Carter administration, I had been given permission to set up a project. I did that, recruited people from agencies, had my boss at OMB be the head of an executive committee to do the study work. And then we had recommendations ready at the end of the Carter administration, but of course, Carter administration ended. So the Reagan administration came in, they were looking for some quick wins. So they embraced those recommendations. And so we were given permission to do an implementation. Again, long story short, the result of that study was the travel regulations changed. We got discount airfares for federal travelers. We changed the per diem system. It was a fundamental reform in the way that travel was managed and executed within the federal government that still exists today. And so I thought, well, hot diggity, now OMB they're going to understand that it's actually possible to make a reform happen. Let's do the next one. Well, they still don't get it. So it's like they simply don't think that it's their responsibility to implement policy. It's all about just making policy. And the rest of my career was built on seizing opportunities where there were policies and kind of running little off the books implementation efforts. But what that did, the reason I mention that is because in doing all that, and some of those implementation efforts reflected, asset categories, but it was like, so I learned a whole lot, but it was, as I have explained in other settings, all of the stuff that I ever did in a medical sense were just Band-Aids. There was a problem, we fixed a problem, and then we moved on. And we never dealt with some of the underlying systemic management problems, which is what ISO 55000 does. ISO 55000 and the whole suite of management system standards says, let's look at the whole organization, and let's look at how the organization is organized and functions in order to accomplish things as an organization. And that was
Jack, I know you didn't see my list of questions because I don't have one, but
anyway, but I'll shut up now and let you ask more.
So I have heard you mention a number associated with that travel policy change in dollars. Do you have a number in dollars that you associate with that?
Several years into the implementation of what they call the City Pair program, which still exists and which generates savings, GAO came and did a review of it and basically said that program saved $2 billion a year. And I mean,
it's kind of a big deal.
It is kind of a big deal. I mean, I'm still waiting for my percentage. Well, just a little bitty bit. But anyway, no. But the whole point is, I mean, I didn't do this by myself. I got a whole bunch of smart people together, and we kind of, as a team, figured it out. And so that's how you do things. You get a team of smart people together, and you figure stuff out. Those are when you're lucky and you have good days. I've had less luck in other things.
Yeah. Well, before we get back to the ISO, I did hear Jack introduce himself in an ISO meeting the other day as having only been involved in the ALN for 6 years.
Yeah. Well,
you want to share a couple brief thoughts about the ALN and your involvement?
First of all, and I mean this from my heart. I cannot thank you and Jack Dempsey and the ALN enough for giving me an opportunity to make what I think is a positive difference in the world. Back when I worked for the federal government and the state government, my whole career was built on trying to make as much of a positive difference as I could within the realm of opportunities that I had. And joining the ALN, and frankly, when I first joined, I was kind of overwhelmed. I'm still somewhat overwhelmed, but it's like there's so many extraordinarily smart people in that group, and they have done so much in the wide world of asset management around the world that, that's like, I felt like kind of the slow guy walking into the room. And I thought, well, I wonder if this is a room I actually belong in, because, it's new, it's different. And thanks to your support, I've joined the U.S. Technical Advisory Group, which is what, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the group within the United States that represents the United States in the international organization that sets asset management standards. And I've joined 3 of their work groups. One of them is the first one I think was work group 3, which is the communications work group. And I joined that because I got interested in how organizations who are certified or involved in asset management present themselves in a publicly accessible way. And those of you who've seen some of the stuff I've written, I went down. Jim correctly accuses me of going down rabbit holes, and one of the rabbit holes was checking out who was actually on that list of known certified organizations and kind of figuring some things out. And so I got involved in working group 3 because they're the working group that's responsible for things like that. Then I got involved in working group 7, which is putting together an international standard to help inform governments around the world or encourage governments around the world to issue policies, government policies, public policies supporting the adoption of asset management. And then the one that was most daunting was Working Group 4, which is actually revising ISO 55000, which is that's like the core of the asset management standard in terms of the principles of that asset management standard. And that was the most daunting of all, because these are the folks, and Jim led the US team who developed that standard. And so this to me was the most daunting, because these are the guys that basically, designed the Holy Grail and were the thinkers that put all this together. And that it's a very impressive group of people that did that. And so I was a little nervous about joining those conversations, and I've learned so much, and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I think of we've been having these sessions, and Jack Dempsey is the convener for this work group 4, and Jack and I are participating in it, and as is Rich Culbertson, Chris Colley, and a number of other people, of course, from around the world. So I'm wondering what you think about participating in that. And I describe it as sort of being, the first time around, I described it as a master's class. Now I think it's a doctorate class. We had a discussion about, a topic the other day, earlier this week, and about value, I guess it was. And we kind of went, with 20 people or something on the Zoom call. And we didn't even go the full 2 hours, because we covered every, the end of every thread that everybody's, of their thoughts about value and asset management and how we should think about it. So, do you have any thoughts to share about some of those topics, or, how they struck you?
Yeah, but you've hit one of my little buttons, and so I feel inclined to tell a little side story.
Go.
So back when I was working for Arthur Andersen, I used to write all these memoranda, and the manager at the time who got them would go through them, and he would just tear them up. And he could tell that I was getting really discouraged by having someone come in and just
good story.
Tear up what I was doing. And so he tried to calm me down and give me perspective on this. He asked me, have you ever heard the story of Napoleon's idiot? And I said, no. And he said, okay, so the story goes that Napoleon, who was known as one of the great battlefield commanders of all time, had an actual bona fide idiot that was part of his training. And he had a little special uniform for the idiot, and he fed him special food. He had him, stay in a special tent. God knows what other accoutrements he had for him. But every time he was planning a major battle, he would kind of sketch out his orders and have the idiot brought in. And he would issue the orders to the idiot. And it was only when the idiot could take those orders and basically feed them back to him in a way that could be understood by anybody that he would go forward with the orders. And the idea was you want somebody to be the communicator between all the people that have the high level thinking and the folks that actually have to get it done. And so that's kind of the role that I try to play in these ISO meetings, because I am literally overwhelmed with the amount of really smart thinking, very complex thinking that many of the participants bring to the table. And we're talking people around the world who have deep experience in all manner of aspects of asset management, way more experience than I do. And so what I try to do for myself, because I have a hard time, putting all this diverse information together in a way that I can absorb it, is I try to, put my Napoleon's idiot hat on. It's a little tricorn hat, and say, this is when I boil it all down, this is the way I can understand it, and I think I can explain it to other people. I mean, you and I have had some real challenges in talking to some of my former colleagues at OMB and kind of getting them to understand the message. And I'm looking forward to other chances to do that, because when we first started, it was, there were a lot of blank looks when we're saying, we're explaining all this stuff, and they're going, huh? And so I hope I'm better able to do that than I was back then. But that's the kind of, so when I'm involved in these working group meetings, I do the best to the extent that I can actually understand something well enough to translate it into something simple. I try to do that because it helps me, and I'm hoping it will help our ultimate audiences.
Well, that's good. So what are your thoughts about the direction this 55,000 document is taking? Are you, do you think it's headed in a good direction? Is it going to be more useful to people, or how's it going to be different, do you think?
I know it's all of our intentions to help make it more useful to people. But I think we're in the midst of sorting stuff out. I mean, we're certainly not there yet. I mean, there have been some fascinating concepts proposed, but it's going to be, for me personally, it's going to be hard to understand what actual direction we're going in until I actually see some proposed language, because there are lots of really good concepts that are being tossed out. And I am told by people like yourself and Peter Kohler in Australia, people who were involved in the original 55,000, that a lot of the battles that were fought back then are being refought now. So clearly a lot of these conversations are not new. They're longstanding sets of views, but it's but we've all learned a lot. The whole community, the world, has learned a lot since it was first put together. And I think we are in a good position to make some changes that will really significantly improve it going forward. Yeah. But it's still a work in progress.
I remember before, just when the first versions in 2014, actually late 2013, then they were published in 2014, came out, saying, boy, it would be great if we could get the words asset management on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or in a Bloomberg article. So then people would start to understand what we mean by asset management. Well, we're far beyond that now.
Well, one of the most interesting things that I've learned is that going back some way, within the U.S. government, there was an awareness by people, mostly, as far as I can tell, in the transportation and infrastructure world, about the importance of asset management. But it was applied to grantees. It was a way to condition, or at least to inform the grant-making agencies, the highway grant-making agencies and the transit grant-making agencies, on whether or not the recipients actually had some concept of asset management as a way to demonstrate a higher level of qualification to receive grant money. Now, although I think that's a wonderful first step, it's clear, I mean, having an asset management plan, which is what some are sometimes required, isn't enough, because what the agencies do and what the recipients do is they go out and they hire somebody who claims to know how to write an asset management plan. They get this plan written and then they present that as evidence that they know what an asset management plan is, but it has no connection at all to what they actually do. And GAO ran into that back when in 2004, there was an executive order that came out that required agencies to do real property asset management plans. And a number of them went out. In fact, apparently most of them went out and actually generated these plans. But when GAO did a review of 6 of those agencies, only one of them still had an asset management plan that was connected to what it did in practice. All the others had provided paper and then moved on. And that's obviously not enough. So you have to demonstrate an organic appreciation, and not just appreciation, but adoption of asset management in a way that's meaningful. And that's more than a piece of paper called an asset management plan.
Yeah, I read an interesting series of posts and comments on LinkedIn today, and about just about doing things for compliance purposes. Now, what was the phrase they used? It was something like compliance fatigue or something. But you come up with a list of things you have to do, and you start doing those things, and then you sort of stop paying attention to why you were doing it in the first place.
One of the folks I worked with at GSA, he was in charge of the aircraft management program, he came from the Navy, and he used the term, people are just answering the mail. You know, it's like something comes in and says, you must do such and such. And so somebody replies, okay, here's such and such, boom. And it's not, there isn't, unless you require something a little more, I hate to use the word invasive, but some people would look at it that way. Essentially, you have to actually make that requirement mean something measurable. And one of the things that we have put in place, and I did a lot of work on this in the federal government, is performance measurement systems that are real, that actually measure performance in ways that are meaningful. Meaningful not just to the oversight agencies, but to the people doing the work. I mean, that's the whole thing about performance, is it has to be embraced by the people whose performance you're trying to affect. Yeah. And, you know, and that's a lot of policy making in the federal government, unfortunately, is just for show. I mean, I think it's well-intended. I think somebody involved in it is well-intended, but it's not, unless you actually are concerned with the implementation of those policies in a very real way, you're not going to be very helpful. You're just going to it goes back to that guidance. We just layered more guidance on people. They struggle to figure out what it means. They resent it. And at the end of the day, it doesn't happen. And they hope they hope the people involved will have gone on, which often happens in government, and just forgotten about it, which isn't good.
So my honey, Helene Shore, has a daughter named Suzanne Petroni, and she's involved in women's issues and is a leading international expert on women's issues and child marriage. But she did her doctorate thesis was on how does change actually happen? And the short answer to the question, obviously there's much more to it, is to find a person within the existing situation that has a passion and an interest in making it happen. It's not somebody from outside. It's not somebody from the top. It's somebody from within the organization. And I just kept thinking of that story as I listened to you today and your experience, and to see how you've impacted these situations by being that person with passion in the situation.
Well, but to Helene's point is, I mean, it's not just having somebody, it's having as many people in the food chain become, be passionate about the thing. It's not just people who are making the policy or the people implementing. But she's right. You've got to have people there that care. But I'll give you a teeny little anecdote on that. In the world of aircraft, I did an OMB circular that basically said, it was designed to respond to a GAO report that aircraft were being misused. And so I did what I always do when I do a government-wide reform effort. I asked the agencies for their experts in that area. So I start out with people from the agencies who actually know something about those programs, and many of them actually care about those programs. And so you've got people there who, from an agency perspective, are passionate about helping their agency manage that program well. And so you get those people in a room, you say, hey, we've got an opportunity here to actually come up with some government-wide policies that could help you get your job done. What would they be? And then at the end of the day, you put together, the collective wisdom of that group of really well-informed people. And the other secret, and this is something that I did in my circular, but OMB hadn't done it generally, is you have to engage tools that communicate with practitioners. And in the federal world, those are regulations. So OMB issues policies through OMB circulars, OMB bulletins, and the high level policies that go to agency heads and the C-suite. Those aren't the people doing the work. The people doing the work get regulations. And so whether it's federal travel regulations, whether it's federal management regulations, they get regulations that are their Bibles for how they do the work. And that's the way you have to communicate policy to people whose behavior you're trying to change. It's just that simple.
Yep, sounds like Michael Lipsky's street level bureaucracy. What matters is the people at the ground level doing the work.
Yep.
Well,
Nick's here with the hook. Unfortunately, he's on mute, so we can't tell you.
I am here, and I'm not here to cut anyone off. Just wanted to quickly thank our sponsors again and kind of segue into the overtime period. So a quick thank you to everyone who's been with us on this web event here today. And if you have to leave because that was the 30 minutes, we understand. But if you have a few more, it sounds like Chris Gully is going to come on and ask some questions live for Jack Kelly. And right before that, we'll just say thank you to our patron sponsors, ABS Quality Evaluations and Onuma System. Again, without their support and the support of these other organizational members, we would not be able to have really awesome programming like this with great guest speakers every week. So big thanks to our members that make this possible. And again, a short plug for retired Colonel Ronald Bordenero next week on August 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern. And with that, it looks like Chris has joined us, and I'll let you guys take it away.
Well, welcome, Chris. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. How are you guys?
Good.
Very interesting discussion. And Jackie, in a long time no see, like few hours, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I can only say, I really appreciate your input and what you do for US TAC and ISO 55000. You're underselling yourself. I really appreciate your experience and different view of the world. I came from private industry and so on. You're from government, so we kind of have on, let's say, different end of spectrum. But from my perspective, I ask a few questions, out there. How do you see yourself and the biggest challenges working for TC251 and the redevelopment of ISO 55000 standard? What are the biggest challenges from your point of view?
The first challenge is you have to comprehend a lot of information and a lot of different perspectives from people around the world who have way more, from my personal standpoint, way more experience than I do. And so they, to me, when they speak up in meetings, they come with instant credibility. I mean, they're there, they represent their countries. They've got long-standing, status within the asset management community. And so I listen to them but there's not like, and you've had way more experience than I have in this as Jim. And so what you're listening to is not like a consistent set of themes. You're listening to this wide variety of perspectives. And so the challenge is how to sort through that and come up with some coherent picture that I can get my head around. And that to me is a big challenge. One of the things I've enjoyed the most, in addition to just the different perspectives, though, is a recognition not only of cultural differences in countries that cause people to think in different ways because their experiences are different from a cultural perspective, but then the practical difference of language differences and the fact that there's certain concepts that really don't lend themselves to easy translation, and having to figure out how to describe a concept in a way that people from lots of different languages can understand in the way it's intended to be understood. And that's a huge challenge.
Yeah, let me jump in, and I failed to introduce Chris. It's easy to think that everybody knows him, but Chris is calling from Florida and is a longtime member of TC251 and the US TAG. And he is now doing a great job as the head of the US TAG. And active participant in most, if not all, of the ISO TC251 work group. So thanks a lot for doing all that, Chris.
And for people that don't know about how international standards are created, the US TAG, as I said before, is the US body that represents the United States in that international forum. And so being the head of that body is a big deal. So I kind of silently genuflected when Chris came on the screen.
Thank you. It is a lot of work. And Jim, Jim used to be the US TAC head long time ago. So, and he did a great job. I remember we go back, I don't know, 12 years, Jim.
Yeah, yeah.
We did some wine in Paris and then drank beer in Prague, in Czech Republic, and something else in Yokohama and Brisbane, Australia. Yes. Interesting. What I'm missing most right now with COVID and so on, that we have only online meeting, short meeting. We used to have face-to-face meeting, and Jack, you were not present at the time. You can meet face-to-face with all those people, and not only on Zoom for 1 or 2 hours. It is completely different experience, and you meet people face-to-face. You can see the body language and so on. It's a great experience, and after that, when you have a Zoom meeting or call, it's different. It's completely different.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Jack? You know, why we have so many problems in US adopting ISO 55000?
You probably asked the hardest question I can imagine. The best, I'm still struggling with answers to that, but one of the answers I think may be the culture in the US. It's not, the US is huge, and we're so much larger than most of the other countries. And I mean, I wish I knew more about what's happening in Russia and China, but I don't know. They're big countries as well. But you have, in the US, you've got a long history of people who love their independence. They don't want people telling them what to do. The idea of joining some, international collaboration is kind of foreign to them. I mean, when I
So to speak.
when Jim and I first went to talk to some of my former OMB colleagues, the first comment that we got back was, "You're telling us about this international standard. Well, it just sounds like more guidance to us." And so the idea that someone outside of themselves was going to tell them what to do, put guidance on them, a non-starter, which, by the way, is the main message I've carried to Working Group 7, is that the idea that ISO is going to tell any country how to issue public policy for asset management, good luck. But nonetheless, I think we've got, within that working group, I think we've got some other ideas about how public policy is influenced. And I think that's the avenue that's one of the avenues that we're pursuing. And I think that's going to be the one that's most promising if we can be successful with it.
From my experience, living in US for 20-something years, East Coast and West Coast are completely different. If you say somebody is doing something well on East Coast, West Coast is different. We can't do it. There is no way in the world, or North and South and so on. So I agree with you. My experience is everybody is individualist, yes, and everybody wants independence. And I also noticed a few times when I talk to private industry, corporations and big plants, they do adopt ISO 55000. And they do adopt the great ideas they learn from somewhere, but they don't want to publicize this. They don't want to talk to anybody about that for one simple reason. They're saying we would lose competitive advantage. I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I've heard this number of times.
Well, it's fun. It's interesting because, I know you and Jim are aware that one of the rabbit holes I went down a number of years ago was to look around the world at all the organizations that were certified to ISO 55001, and to recognize what people in the asset management community know, which is that there are basically 4 countries that are way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of being organizations that are certified, and those are Japan, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. And they're like up in the high 30s, 40s, 50s, or in terms of organizations. And everybody else starts at about 13 and goes to fewer below. So there's a huge gap. And so I got curious as to what is it about those 4 countries that cause them to be so much further ahead in their adoption of this standard. And the main thing that I have concluded, and I'm still hoping for more information on this, is that all 4 of those countries have one, they're smaller, and 2, they have strong engineering traditions. And so you have people at different levels of government, different levels of industry who come out of an engineering background. They understand how standards can be helpful. They understand the disciplined approach to management that is the basis of the management systems standard approach that ISO has taken. And so these things are not new to them, and they're not problematic. They welcome them, and they love the structure themselves. And so we don't have that. We're kind of we're like the Mavericks on the range, right? We carry the 6 guns and we'll shoot to kill. And so, it's just a different culture.
So
It is, yeah, it is. I used to work for Siemens a long time ago, and I remember in 1990s, living in Australia, we're implementing ISO 9001. And working for Siemens at the time, Siemens was laughing. We are better than ISO 9001. It didn't take long, just a few years, they adopted the standard. So big corporations started adopting this. I think one of the first ones were the big car manufacturing companies. And they forced basically their suppliers to do it. And I remember in Australia in 1990s, Australian government did the same. Said, if you don't adopt 9001, you are not doing business with me. And there was quite a few big companies in Australia, like BHP and so on, very heavy industry, asset intensive, that they did adopt. They didn't call this asset management at that time, but basically what ISO 55001 is. I guess that's one of the reasons that Australia is in the forefront in adopting the standard. Also, you say, US is big, Australia is small. We need to remember that Australia length is like US, continental US, area-wise. We've only, I don't remember now, maybe 22, 24 million people, so like metropolitan New York. So they had to look after the asset in a smart way. I think this also prompted them, we have to do something innovative, otherwise we can't survive, right?
Yep.
the thing is, in Australia, it really is a flyover zone.
Well, it's funny. I'm glad you mentioned Australia, because as I looked around the world, to me, Australia they're like the gold standard for asset management. Asset management has been part of the way they think about doing things for a long, long time. And the first time I ever heard somebody say that there is a standard that's higher than ISO 55000, I had no idea what they meant. Well, it turns out that I finally learned a couple of things from Australia. And so one of the things in Australia, their national accreditation body, which is called JASANS, they actually have a higher level requirement for organizations to be accredited certification bodies than ISO requires. And the main thing that they require that's above what ISO requires is demonstration of competence. There's there's 2 other international groups whose acronyms I can't remember, but GFAM is, I think, one, and I can't remember the other. They're not people that
FMAA and so on, yeah.
Yeah, but there are other people around the world that are thinking about aspects of asset management that aren't incorporated formally in the ISO structure. So, but they're great thoughts, and they're great. There's a lot of useful knowledge that's being generated, that's brought in. By the way, Jim, I can't remember, Chris, or you or Jim asked me what I find most interesting in Working Group 4. The thing, and this is kind of a technical thing, and I hope others won't get bored when I mention this. So ISO 55000 is one of maybe 80 management system standards. And there's I think a belief on the part of people in ISO, and I share this belief, that there are common elements that cut across all of these management system standards, because a lot of the guts of these standards are just good management practices. And so they're characteristics of a successful management system. And what one of the conversations that sort of started in working group 4, and I haven't seen it picked back up again, is do we want to be more mindful of those aspects of ISO 55000 that are common to the broader set of management system standards, and then focus on the things that are unique about asset management, or do we just want to keep on keeping on? I hope that we can do that, because I think that would help people understand that a whole lot of what we're talking about is what they're already doing. I mean, companies that are really good at and successful already do a lot of the stuff that are in the standard. I mean, it's people like them that contributed to putting the standard together in the first place. So it's not like the standard represents a lot of unique stuff. It just represents a lot of stuff that people have understood to be best practices around the world. And it's just, people ought to get on that bandwagon. It's worth it.
All right, so I'm going to jump in and say, I'm going to call time, because we could talk for obviously hours. I just glanced down at the attendees, and I think Peter Kohler from Australia will be pleased at your homage to Australia and asset management. And it's almost time to have Peter on again, probably. But Chris, we want to schedule some time with you in the near future to talk about the new relationship between ALN and the US TAG. So maybe in a couple of weeks, we could get you on. And Jack, we want to say thank you to you for your great thoughts today. We got nothing but highlights, I think. And thanks to Mike Bordenaro for all his work that he does, and for Nick is producing today's show. Thank you, Nick. And thank you for all that have attended and participated. We really appreciate it. If we had one ask for the people that participate, is when we post a show or some of the highlights, if you're a LinkedIn or a Facebook person, or even a TikTok, I guess, if you could share those so we can move this on to even a wider audience, because I think we have some important information to share from our guests. And with that, I'll say one more time is happy 1-year anniversary. Yeah, as Cecilia said.
Thank you for a great job, Jim, and ILN. And Jack, thank you for contributing to US TAG.
Thank you for the chance. I appreciate it.
Have a great day, everyone.